I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars. It is so hot here today in Sydney. Also pretty hot are the Cupra Leons behind me. Cupra is of course a Volkswagen Group brand, the Spanish side of the brand, and when they arrived here in Australia, one of the models they brought with them was the Leon. Now it shares some of its components with the Volkswagen Golf and the Skoda Octavia, but the Leon is considerably sportier than those vehicles, and uniquely our market actually gets them in 4 very distinct flavors. There is, here in the petrol blue matte, the VZx, which is a real weapon, a real missile, 221 kilowatts of power. There's what I think is the sweetie of the range, the V 140 kilowatt entry level car. There's the VZ, which is more or less Golf GTI specs, 180 kilowatts of power. And then there is this one, perhaps the most interesting of all, the VZe. It's also a 180 kilowatt tune, but it's a plug-in hybrid with about 45 Ks of range in the real world. If you're thinking about a Leon, which one is best? Well, I'm gonna give you 2 recommendations today. Let's get stuck into it. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. Fundamentally, all of these Leon hatches have a very similar cabin. The one I'm sitting in here is the VZx. It's the most different of all the vehicles I've brought along today because the interior is blue, not a color we see too often on the interior of cars, but Cupra's signature petrol blue color is on the outside of this vehicle in matte and on the inside in leather, and it's up on the dash too. But all Leons get copper stitching, which is a really nice differentiator. And even though manual fabric seats are standard on most grades, all of them can be optioned with leather upholstery, which is most of the time in a sort of dark charcoal rather than blue on the other variants. The driver's seat picks up electric adjustment and memory, and both front seats get heating. Probably a package that I would option on all these cars just so you can make sure the seat is as comfortable as possible with the extra angles of adjustment that you're going to get. But the interior is actually a really nice one. The ergonomics are good in this car. The steering wheel is small, falls to hand well, good sized paddle shifters, and the technology works pretty well most of the time. We've got a 12-inch touchscreen over here with wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, a 10-inch digital instrument cluster on all grades as well. Plus you can get a Beats stereo. It's optional on some cars, standard here on the VZx, and it sounds reasonably good, although Cupra will be moving to Sennheiser audio in future. Quality is reasonably good. It's probably not quite as plush as a Volkswagen Golf in terms of the material selection, although it is about on a par, I would say, with the current generation Audi A3. So reasonably premium, not luxurious, but I think that's probably the vibe Cupra was going for. All in all, it's a nice place to be. Just before we take these 4 flavors out for a drive, I'll show you the backseat space because it's actually reasonably decent. These are not big cars, but they're well packaged, and you can see that in the back I fit. I'm 6 foot, 183 centimeters. I've got good headroom, even with the sunroof optioned in. Legroom's good and tow room is fine. Now, if you do want more space, you could go for something like a Skoda Octavia RS, but Cupra itself is considering bringing the wagon version of the Leon to Australia in both the plug-in hybrid and this top spec VZx format. All right, let's dive into driving these Leons. And I'm gonna start out, of course, in the most affordable, the Leon V. And I love the fact that the test car that we've got here today is actually the cheapest possible Leon. It's a Nevada white. It has no options at all on it. So we're talking around 50 grand, just under 50 grand drive away, which is actually a cracking deal for the amount of depth in the chassis of this car. And I reckon the V could be the sweetest. I've now spent a lot of time driving all of the Leon models. I've kind of tried to become as much of a subject matter expert in Cupra as I can over the last couple of years, really followed this brand. But with the Leon V, I took it on a massive drive across regional New South Wales last year and came away with a lot of praise for this car because, look, I'm a little bit traditional when it comes to hot hatches. I don't think big power is necessarily what makes a hot hatch. I think it's much more about chassis and using them as a momentum car. I understand these days, 2024, a lot of people do want big power, and we'll get to that, especially in the VZx. But for now, let's check out the V, because here we've got the basic 2-litre TSI EA888 engine, long running, durable, but in a slightly lower state of tune here, 140 kilowatts of power, 320 newton meters of torque. But because this car isn't too heavy, it's about 1460 kilos in base trim, it is still pretty quick. Now, I say pretty quick, it's in sort of around 7 seconds on a temperate day. When we tested these cars in blazing hot midsummer weather, I think it was around mid-7s. For me, that's actually quick enough. For you, you may well be wanting something a lot quicker, which of course Cupra can sell you. But what I find is that the Leon V is so pliable on a country road, partially because its wheel and tyre package is quite a bit more sensible than the other variants of Leon. So while you have a willing engine and a sort of high-spirited car here that's happy to give you really decent acceleration, it's actually the way that the car handles once you're at speed, which is really special. Now, all the Leons have a quick steering rack. You'll notice that if you're coming from something like a Golf GTI, the steering is lighter and it's quicker. It really wants to throw that nose towards the corner of the apex. You really hold these Leons by the scruff of their neck and they are more than happy to play. But here with the V, we actually have a smaller wheel. We have an 18-inch wheel, so we've got more sidewall, which is what you want on Australian country roads, because like the really tough one I'm using for this comparison, they're lumpy, they're bumpy. A little bit more compliance from the tyre massively helps you actually stay connected to the ground and deliver that power. So having a little bit of extra sidewall actually gives you a bit more compliance. A bit more compliance means you're staying on the ground more, the stability control system's happier, and you're able to deliver more of that power more consistently. Plus, it's literally just more comfortable. But even the V has adaptive dampers across 15 stages, but you really notice on a back-to-back drive that the V rides the best, and it's not particularly close. But we still have that feel of lightness. In fact, it is the lightest of all of the Leons, so that should be most classic here in the V. It's happy to rotate its rear end in ESC Sport. Holy moly. It's just a lovely, feelsome thing. And the fact that it isn't outrageously priced is, you know, potentially a clincher. So the V looks strong from the start. Next up, the silver VZ. And so often in life, the Goldilocks option is the best. Not too hot, not too cold. Is that the case with the Cupra Leon? Well, what we're moving into here is a mechanical package which could lazily be described as the Golf GTI of the Cupra Leon world, because we have an engine tune which is equal to the Golf GTI, but also equal to a bunch of other cars in the Volkswagen Group, including the Skoda Octavia RS. It is again the 2-litre turbo petrol 4-cylinder. But here it makes 180 kilowatts of power and 370 Newton meters of torque. Same 7-speed wet DSG automatic as the base model, but here we also pick up a mechanical front differential for the first time. So we've essentially got an electronically controlled, mechanically locking LSD on the front axle, which should help pull us out of corners. And when we get to our hairpin section in a minute or two, we'll see how much of a difference that makes. You do notice a couple of differences right away when you move from the V to the VZ. However, there is definitely a sportier exhaust tune here in the VZ at all times. You start up the car and you really notice the drone that comes with the twin exhaust from the VZ by default. Sounds quite bassy, sounds quite sporty. And then all the time when you're driving the car, it's sort of accompanied by this sort of deeper exhaust sound, and it is augmented through the speakers, but does that really matter? Certainly it's going to give you the sensation on a test drive that it's a little bit sportier, a little bit harder edged than the V, which is of course the entire point. And it isn't just the sensation of being sportier and harder edged. The VZ is also quicker in our performance testing by a meaningful amount. But like all Leons, it's still front-wheel drive, and that's one way the Leon differs from the Golf and from the A3, in that, at least in Australia, you can't get an all-wheel drive version of this hot hatch. Now overseas, the Leon Wagon VZx does have all-wheel drive, and that car is being considered for Australia. Perhaps that would be the ultimate Leon. We'll have to wait and see, but when I drove it last year overseas, I thought it was definitely quite good. All right, now getting on to attacking a faster bit of road here in the Leon VZ, and it's going to be all about that front end. Is it able to give us more options coming out of corners? Let's see. Well, it certainly feels maybe 20-30% more tenacious, because of course here we're able to get those front wheels turning at the same speed. We're not lighting up the inside wheel. I would say there's absolutely more drive out of corners now that we're picking up that VAQ front differential here, but it perhaps doesn't make as much of a difference in the real world as you might suspect. There's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, the VZ just as if to illustrate my point, the VZ moves to a larger diameter alloy wheel, so the compliance is going a little bit backwards. So if the road's pockmarked and bumpy like this one, driving out of corners, you've got a little bit less compliance. So even though we've got that diff, you're not always going to be able to put the power down quite as well, because you are noticing the bumps. The car's getting a little bit more upset over the bumps than in the V. And the other reason it doesn't make as much of a difference in the real world for this car is because the Leon is so malleable and you can really get the rear end working. In the base car, kind of step out the rear a little bit as an option to get the car pointing a bit more straight out of the corner. So do you need the front diff? So now onto what I would say is the dark horse of the Cupra Leon lineup. This is the VZe. So kind of pitched as being like a VZ, but it's an E, so it's a plug-in hybrid. Now, Cupra kind of led the way for the Volkswagen Group in Australia in some ways in introducing plug-in hybrids, which is one strategy available to manufacturers to reduce their fleet average emissions in Europe, and it looks like that could be the standard by which manufacturer emissions are going to be measured here in Australia. So we're probably going to see more plug-in hybrids emerging in future. And if more of them are like this Leon VZe, then we're going to be doing fine in terms of performance car enthusiasts, because this plug-in hybrid is a really good one for reasons that I'm going to explain. But first of all, I just want to start with the basic mechanical package, because it's easy to get a little bit overwhelmed by plug-in hybrids. They're doing this, they're doing that, but it's pretty simple if we just break it down into its constituent parts. So what we've got here under the bonnet is basically a fairly simple Volkswagen Golf-like engine. It's a 1.4 litre turbo petrol 4. It makes 110 kilowatts of power and 250 Newton meters by itself. That's an engine tune that we see in plenty of small cars across the Volkswagen Group, which we normally praise for feeling more muscular than their relatively modest power output would suggest. But the Leon VZe basically has a whole second powertrain available to it as well, and that is that sandwiched between the 1.4 litre engine and the 6-speed wet DSG automatic transmission, there is an 85 kilowatt electric motor in there. So it's almost like we've got a Golf 110 TSI and a Polo 85 TSI sandwiched together. In ideal conditions, this recipe will produce 180 kilowatts of power and 400 Newton meters of torque. So the power of a VZ and the torque of the VZx. Now, for all of that to work together in unison, you've got to have some charge in the battery, you've got to have some fuel in your petrol tank, just like we do now, and accelerating away, we're getting some muscularity from the 1.4 petrol, but we're also getting this surge of electric torque. And so it's no surprise that the Leon VZe scoots to 100 pretty quickly. Interestingly, it also delivers excellent braking performance, the best braking of any of the Leons, and that's been consistent over tests across about a 12-month period, which is really interesting. That's despite being the heaviest Leon. Because we've got a package, a battery, which is about 10.5 kilowatt hours usable here in this vehicle, the VZe weighs about 170 kilograms more than a Leon V. So what is that, two big guys riding along with you? Not a huge difference, but you are going to notice it. But because you've got instantly accessible electric torque, in a lot of ways the performance makes up for the extra weight, plus there's been a pretty significant retune of important points of the chassis to make the VZe drive quite a bit like the other Leons. It's particularly noticeable in the adaptive suspension. Even though we've still got 19-inch wheels here, the suspension is a little bit softer, and that can actually make the VZe better to drive on a road like this. You feel like you've got a little bit of extra wheel movement available to you. It's able to soak up more of those bumps more noticeably than in a VZ or a VZe. You just have to be a little bit more patient at the limit in terms of your handling, because you are going to feel that extra inertia. You know, you're kind of adding another 10-15% of weight to this vehicle. That isn't nothing, but it is still really fun and rewarding to drive, and it is exceptionally fuel efficient. You'll see around 6 liters per 100 Ks in the real world. Even on a flat battery, you'll get around 45 Ks of all electric range realistically. All right, so in some ways, save the best till last, but is it the best? All will be revealed at the end of the video. This is the Leon VZx. It is the spiciest of the 4 Leons, certainly the most powerful. Same basic 2-litre turbo EA888 engine, but there are some different mechanicals in the engine, and there is also a very different tune that results. 221 kilowatts of power in the VZx, 400 Newton meters of torque, so it is up there in terms of the Volkswagen Group's front-wheel drive hot hatches. You can get a 228 kilowatt tune in the Formentor SUV, and of course vehicles like the Golf R have 235 kilowatts, moving to 245 kilowatts soon, but 221 is nothing to sneeze at. And of course this is the quickest of the Leons from 0 to 100. It is quite formidably quick, even though none of these vehicles are slow. What it translates to out on the road is that the VZx is just an absolute missile when it gets on boost. If we flick down a couple of gears here, you get this crazy induction sound in the VZx. You get a whole bunch of turbo whoosh, you get a whole bunch of extra sensory input that you don't actually get in the other models. There's certainly a sensation that the VZx is the Leon unchained. Does that necessarily make it the best? No, but if what you're after is the adrenaline rush of the fastest possible Leon, then the VZx is the only way to go. And the good news is that it also stops pretty well. This one's just got standard brakes, but we have performance tested one with the optional Brembo brakes in the past, and it stopped exceptionally well, almost as good as the plug-in hybrid, which stops really quite surprisingly well, but it's something that's been consistently repeated in its testing with us at Chasing Cars. Now, the VZx may be hardcore when it comes to the response of the 2-litre engine, and also how sharply the front diff hooks up and how quickly, but its ride and handling isn't actually that much more aggressive than the other models. The base model really has that nicely rounded persona, as does the VZe, but between the VZ and the VZx, there's not a massive difference when it comes to ride and handling. They're both on the same size wheel, and I would say that the tune running through their 15-stage adaptive dampers is, if not the same, it's very similar, because the way that they handle bumps and potholes on the road is almost identical through the seat of the pants. But like other Leons, the VZx has terrifically quick steering. It's light over the front axle, so it just throws its front end into the corners and really digs its way out through hairpins. It works hard, it's got plenty of grip, it communicates a lot to you as a driver, and it's an exciting, fun, quick car to drive. Certainly with an emphasis on the quick in the case of the VZx. But all things considered, including price, does that make the VZx the best Leon? Well, let's find out. Now we've parked up, what about the practical bits? What do these cars cost to run for a start? No matter which Leon you choose, all are eligible for service plans that cost $990 for 3 years or $1,990 for 5 years. The warranty is 5 years for unlimited kilometers and 8 years or 160,000 kilometers for the battery in the VZe. Speaking of the VZe's battery, we found that this delivered 45 kilometers of range in real-world urban testing. Keep in mind the VZe's battery does eat up some boot space and also pinches the space-saver spare wheel that's standard on the other Leons. But what about fuel economy? Well, the hybrid VZe still delivered 6.5 litres per 100 kilometers on our economy loop with a dead battery. Even despite its small 40-litre fuel tank, it manages total range of 660 kilometers in the real world, starting with a brimmed tank and full battery. The petrol-only models, which have 50-litre fuel tanks, differ about as you'd expect. The entry-level V achieved 8 litres per 100 kilometers, the VZ 8.7 and the VZx 9. All can do more than 550 Ks on a single tank, which is decent. So the verdict. Well, the VZx behind me and the VZ are both quick and super interesting cars to drive, but my recommendations are both the white painted cars. So firstly is the V. This is the sweetie of the range. It's the cheapest Leon, the most affordable to get into if you're a cash buyer. And because it has a little bit less power, not much, it's still got 140 kilowatts in a pretty light hatchback shape, you can really extract the most out of this engine without too many license endangering speeds. The ride and handling are fantastic, and if you add the leather package to it, it's a little premium car, maybe a good replacement for something like a Golf Highline. The V is so charming. But if you're a leasing customer or you plan to salary sacrifice for your car, the VZe is by far the best deal. Why? Because it's a plug-in hybrid, but it's also a plug-in hybrid that isn't bloody miserable like many of the PHEVs that we have tested here at Chasing Cars. The The Leon VZe is a delight to drive. It has a smaller, lighter petrol engine over the front axle, so its steering is even better than the other Leons in the range. It realistically delivers 45 kilometers of EV running if you want to charge this car up, but even if you don't charge it, it's smooth, it's powerful and easy to drive just as a closed circuit hybrid. And if you are a leasing customer, you'll pay 0 FBT on this car if you get it registered before about the middle of next year. So that makes this an incredibly cheap vehicle to run on a leasing package. So those are my impressions. What are yours? Let me know down below this video in the comments. While you're there, hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.